So help me God.
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 Hello, everybody. My name is Rob Lee. I am a doctoral candidate at the Pacific School of Religion, and today we're going to talk about President Harry S. Truman. Harry Truman lived from 1884 to 1972. He served as the 33rd President of the United States from 1945 to 1953, and he considered himself Northern American Baptist, which today would be considered the American Baptist Church, USA. Harry S. Truman is one of my favorite presidents, and for sure the favorite president of this entire recording session and this season. He came to power at one of the most consequential times in our nation's history. In a baptism by fire, the first 6 months of his presidency would require him to make decisions that no human has had to make prior to his presidency or since his time in office. While the horrors of the atomic bomb are immeasurable, his decision is argued would be based in the American issues, in interests and preservation of life. It's such a profoundly broken decision to have to make in the first place. To be clear, my respect is found not in his decision to annihilate people in Japan, but in his poised and impossible decision. But we will explore that more momentarily. For now, let's learn about Harry Truman with some facts and figures. Harry Truman was born in Missouri in 1884. Now, his middle initial, the S, does not stand for anything. There is disagreement among historians as to whether to make this sound more politician-esque, or rather it was an honorific of both grandfathers who had S's in their middle name. Either way, the S does not stand for anything like, my W stands for right or your G stands for Gregory. His S was just the letter S. Truman had a childhood characteristic of the age of his time, and ultimately dropped out of business school after graduating from Independence High School in 1901. He would be the only president since William McKinley to not have earned a college degree. He proposed to Beth Wallace the first time in 1911, but it wouldn't be until 1919 that the future First Lady would accept his proposal for marriage. Truman lacked funds for college or really anything for that matter. He considered attending the United States Military Academy at West Point, but was turned down due to poor eyesight. He wore glasses all of his life and had really incredibly just awful eyesight. His eyesight was so bad that he was denied entry into the military service the first time, and he would subsequently achieve his goal of joining the military by memorizing the eye chart that was required for entry. During World War I, he was appointed first lieutenant of Battery B and served in the capacities from discipline to Camp Canteen. He would serve a tour in France in conjunction with his promotion to captain. And after the war, Truman opened a haberdashery in Kansas City, but it went bankrupt. He would then be elected to county court judge of Jackson's Eastern District in 1922. In 1934, after years of off and on service in various courtrooms in Jackson County, he was backed by the Democratic Party machine for the 1934 election to the United States Senate from the state of Missouri. He would beat Republican incumbent Roscoe C. Patterson by 20 percentage points. He would serve and be reelected to his second term in the Senate in 1940. In March of 1941, he would form the Truman Committee in the United States Senate to ensure that there was fiscal responsibility as wartime production and spending was ramping up in anticipation of an eventual conflict. Truman and his cohort would save the country as much as $15 billion at the time in wasteful spending, which is obviously much more today. In 1944, President Franklin Roosevelt recognized that his vice president, Henry Wallace, was far too left and labor-friendly to be a feasible president should FDR's ailing health finally fail. After various choices were presented, Roosevelt would land on Truman as his vice presidential pick for the 1944 election. No one at the time realized how truly consequential that choice would be. During his few months as vice president, and it literally was a few months, Truman would keep his Senate offices, opting for them to be his choice for work over the opulent president of the Senate offices, save for only official functions. He was the first vice president to have a Secret Service detail, but he would only cast one tie-breaking vote in the Senate during his tenure. Remember that vice presidents cast tie-breaking votes as president of the Senate. Truman would serve as vice president of the United States for 82 days when FDR died in April of 1945. He was ill-prepared in some faculties to ascend to the presidency, as the Roosevelt administration had largely left him in the dark regarding the war effort, including the now famous Manhattan Project that was deeply classified and was hastily working on what we know now as the atomic bomb. Truman was briefly told of the Manhattan Project, again, the atomic bomb, after assuming office on April 12th, but he would not be fully briefed until April 25th of 1945. It was becoming evident that there was a need for a ground invasion of Japan to decapitate the empire, even after the Nazis had surrendered in May. Truman received military estimates that a ground assault could take as long as a year and result in tactical losses between 250,000 and 500,000 Allied casualties. Truman realized that a tactical precision bombing with this new weapon of war would take less lives but deliver a significant message and blow to the Japanese war machine. In an effort to stave Allied casualties and casualties of that of Japan, the order was given for the president to drop 2 atomic bombs on Japanese cities. On August 6th, Hiroshima was bombed first, becoming the first city to be party to a nuclear attack. And Nagasaki was hit 3 days later. This would leave 105,000 dead and lead to the surrender of the Japanese Empire on the 15th of August, 1945. The formal surrender would occur in September of that year. There is no escaping the pain that the atomic bomb caused, and indeed issuing in and ushering in a new era of wartime for the world. And scholars have debated the use of the atomic bomb ever since it was used in August of 1945. The decision to render atomic energy as a weapon was consequential not only for Truman, but for humankind. This changed the way people viewed the world. We could now play God in ways we hadn't played before. President Truman would defend his use of the atomic bomb in 1948 by saying, "As President of the United States, I had the faithful responsibility of deciding whether or not to use this weapon for the first time. It was the hardest decision I ever had to make. But the president cannot duck hard problems. He cannot pass the buck. I made the decision after discussions with the ablest men in our government and after long prayerful consideration. I decided that the bomb should be used to end the war quickly and save countless lives, Japanese and Americans as well." In 1948, Truman would go down in history for his come-from-behind victory against Republican for president Governor Thomas Dewey. He would famously hold a copy of the Chicago Tribune after the election that erroneously reported that the New York Republican governor had won. President Truman's second inauguration would be the first to be televised. Truman's second term would lead to significant souring of relations between the United States and the Soviet Union. Scott, you'll remember that the United States and the USSR were allies during the first and Second World Wars, and much of this was due to the Soviets' quest for an atomic bomb and develop of a hydrogen bomb under Joseph Stalin. The first United States H-bomb test occurred on Halloween 1952. Truman would also face U.S. entry into the Korean War. This war would prove an albatross for Truman's popularity and greater legacy. In 1948, the White House had comprehensive dismantling and rebuilding of its interior due to major disrepair. You can hear more about that in our bonus episode on the White House that'll actually be released tomorrow. The president would move with his family to the Blair House, which is across the street from the White House. He would walk to work across the street to the West Wing and Oval Office each day for a very long time. During that time, he would face an assassination attempt that would mortally wound a police officer. President Truman would leave office in 1953, less popular than President Nixon at the time of his resignation in 1974. Even still, his popularity and legend would grow. Modern day polls would hold him in high regard, often putting him in the top 10 of the 45 men who had served in the office of the president. Scott, it's really interesting. Our Nana, tells the story of our great-grandfather, her dad, who would talk about how President Truman got a bad rap and he would ultimately be considered a really popular president. Now, Big Dad obviously didn't get to see the fruition of his prediction, but he did predict that Truman would be a far better president in history's eyes than that of the eyes of his present era. President Truman would leave office and return to Independence, Missouri with his wife. He would struggle financially really badly, much akin to President Grant in the 1800s. What is the most powerful person to do in a long retirement? In 1958, the Former President's Act was passed by the United States Congress, ensuring that a pension would be afforded to the president after they leave office. This was the only other former living president. Herbert Hoover was really wealthy and did not need the pension financially, but took it in order to avoid embarrassment for Truman. Subsequently, studies have shown that Truman may have not been in abject poverty, but was certainly in dire financial straits during his post-presidency. That would all lead to the Former President's Act being passed. Congress was already receiving a pension at the time of that passage. In 1964, Truman's health was declining and he took a fall. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed a Medicare bill at the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum and gave the first 2 Medicare cards to Harry and Bess Truman to honor the former president's efforts to give government health care to those in need. In early December of 1972, the 33rd president was admitted to the hospital with a case of pneumonia. He would dip into a coma and die on December 26, 1972, at the age of 88. He would be buried at the Presidential Library and Museum in Independence. First Lady Bess Truman died in 1982 and is buried next to the man who was accidentally the president of the United States. So what about his faith and his public life? What is known about this? The Truman Library and Museum suggests that Truman's mother and father first met at Blue Ridge Baptist Church. In 1890, the Trumans moved to Independence, Missouri, so that young Harry might attend Sunday school at the Presbyterian church there. It would be a full 2 years before, at the age of 8, the future president of the United States would attend conventional schooling. Due to Sabbath restrictions for the Jewish community in Independence, Harry would serve as a Shabbos goy for his Jewish neighbors in the area. That means that he would perform tasks for Jewish people on the Sabbath that their religion would prevent them from doing. Truman would be baptized at the age of 18 in 1902 at Benton Boulevard Baptist Church. He would describe himself as a Lightfoot Baptist, meaning that Baptists do not want a person to go to shows or dance or do anything for a good time. Well, I like to do all those things and play cards besides. So you see, I'm not a very strong as a Baptist, he would say. Truman would also assist in digging graves for the Baptist Church's cemetery, which had a profound effect on him and his thoughts about death. During World War I, Truman, who was raised in the Presbyterian and Baptist traditions and proclivities, had little concept of liturgical calendars or commemorations that would come from other denominations. In a letter to his future wife, Bess, he would say, I know nothing about Lent and such things. Most of the soldiers that he were serving with and were serving under him were Roman Catholic and thus commemorated the season of Lent. Despite his lack of understanding, he would work hard to be accommodating to those soldiers and ensure that they had the religious observance that they need. A member of First Baptist Church of Grandview, he would seldom attend church services after being elected to public office, as he felt that he was often a showpiece or someone on exhibit during public worship. On his first full day as president, President Truman told reporters, "Boys, if you ever pray, pray for me now. I don't know if you fellas ever had a load of hay fall on you, but when they told me that what happened yesterday, I felt like the moon, the stars, and all the planets had fallen on me. After his learning of the atomic bomb's capabilities in 1945, Truman would write in his diary, "We have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world. It may be the fire destruction prophesied in the Euphrates Valley era after Noah and his fabulous ark." So obviously, Truman had a real sense of biblical knowledge and a sense of prayer that he often employed in his public religiosity. Truman would recognize Israel in 1948, 11 minutes after it declared itself a nation. The decision was based on his longtime fascination with the biblical conception of the Israelite people. And it's important to note here that the Israelite people are different from the Israelis of the 1940s and of today. He was a self-avowed Zionist, even from his Senate days, and in his administration's decision to recognize Israel would come at the protest of Secretary of State George Marshall, who feared it would hurt relations with Arab nations in the Middle East. The establishment of support for the Israelis would signal a new and close ally for the United States of America, one that remains consequentially close to this day, as we have seen in recent weeks. After President Truman's death, his wife opted for a private service to funeralize the former president at the Truman Library rather than a state funeral in Washington, D.C. Even still, the memorial service was held at Washington National Cathedral for the former president for dignitaries and state officials a week after the private service. So, Scott, what questions do you have?
So my questions are: it seemed like this guy was a really stand-up dude, from digging graves to being like the little boy on what was it like when he helps the Jewish people do their
Yeah,
stuff on
Shabbos
Sabbath.
boy. Yeah.
That's so cool. Um, so I guess one of my questions that I wrote down while you were talking was I really want to know how much this man was getting paid, like pension wise, because I might try to become president if it's enough. How much is it?
Prior to 2001, the president made for about 30 years or so, it was $200,000. The president's salary was raised in 2001 with the provision in the Treasury Appropriations Bill to $400,000 per year. That means that pension wise, it's about at that mark. It also means the former President's Act also affords Secret Service and other benefits and the establishment of an office for them so that they can have the merits of the office in some ways and be able to do what they need to do to get the job done. Some presidents, including former President Donald Trump, have refused the salary or claimed that they're refusing the salary. There was some question as to whether President Trump actually did or not. And that would be used in various ways and donated to various causes or charities. And that's happened a few times. But really, that we're looking today, if you were to run for president and to become president, you would make that's just the base salary. Now, that said, it is the highest federal salary in the entire federal government. They have a $50,000 expense account, and I'll explain why in a second. They have $100,000 non-taxable for travel, and they have $19,000 for official entertainment account for free housing. They have, as a pension, they have $150,000 in cash. They have around $150,000 to maintain their staff. So you can see in some ways, it can be very lucrative to be in government if you've been making minimum wage, as some of our newer representatives have been. You think of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was a bartender. There's a new Gen Z representative who was not making much and now is making this good money in our eyes due to being elected to the House of Representatives. So you can see how it could be life-changing for some. Then again, for others, you think of some of the more wealthy people in Congress. I'm thinking of some of our senators who are millionaires and multimillionaires. It's not a lot.
So we talked about him bouncing around from multiple religions over his lifespan and trying to understand them. And you said that he was a Northern Baptist, and I'm mostly familiar with the Southern Baptist. Could you tell me the difference between the two and how they kind of split? Was it like a Methodist church thing where they disagreed and they were like, all right, we're going to split? Whenever a church has a disagreement, apparently we split. Shout out churches, AO. But yeah, I would like you to talk to me about that because I would like to know the landscape because we're getting closer and closer to our modern time, and I think this affects us a little bit more as we really start to go past the 1960s and whatnot.
Yeah. So the Southern Baptist Convention and the Northern Baptist Convention did kind of split off of the issue that similar to that of the Methodist Church over slavery and the realities therein. It would end up being consequential for both denominations. Of course, the Southern Baptist Convention behind the Roman Catholic Church is the largest, and it is the largest Protestant denomination in the country, second largest denomination in the country. So I think it's obviously got its issues that we will talk about more when we talk about Jimmy Carter in the next episode. Jimmy Carter was Southern Baptist at the time and become Cooperative Baptist. But this form of Northern Baptist, you kind of think of it more as mainline. Some of the famous Protestant churches, mainline churches, are American Baptists, such as the Riverside Church in New York City, a famed bastion of liberal progressive thought. So you see, there's a real difference between that of the Southern Baptist Convention and their Northern counterparts, both theologically, political leanings, stuff like that.
What exactly are the main differences between the two? Like belief wise and maybe even worship wise, are they kind of in the same realm of like elevation?
I would say is that the Northern Baptist and American Baptist, now American Baptist, would be more akin to that of Methodist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, mainline kind of churches in terms of worship and theological thinking. Whereas the Southern Baptist, in large part, I mean, it has its liturgical components, but not really, and would be more akin to that of an evangelical experience.
Yeah, so one more thing. Is there anything about like how he dealt with the guilt of dropping a bomb like that?
The president at the time would deal with the guilt and the reality. I don't know if it's the right word to guilt. He was pretty confident in his decision, but he would have to reckon with that decision for a lifetime. Was it the right thing to do? Was it the thing that was readily available to him was the most just thing to do? And the answer is left to one's conscious decisions about what they think. I mean, it's impossible to decide for many of us what we would have done had we been given the same power, the same responsibility, and the same decision making. So yeah, next up, we have President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th president of the United States, who would immediately follow President Truman. In an interesting twist of fate, President Truman would actually ask for Dwight Eisenhower to run as a Democrat, but he would ultimately run as a Republican and secure the nomination. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in to So Help Me Pod. Check out other episodes and our presidential theological database at www.roblee4.com/presidents. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
You've been listening to So Help Me Pod, a podcast of Beloved Journal in conjunction with Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. The podcast is offered in partial completion of the Doctor of Ministry degree for the Reverend Robert W. Lee. All opinions and insights offered are solely owned by that of those who offered them and do not reflect the views of stakeholders in the project. There have been 45 men and 46 presidential administrations. All of them unique. Some of them have been more interesting than others, some of them more terrifying than others. All have been part of the grand expression of democracy on the North American continent and part of the wider conversation of self-governance in the world. These men have failed profoundly, and we have failed profoundly in following their leadership along with our own sometimes antiquated and backwards ways of viewing and acting in the world. That said, this form of leadership is unlike few other, and the greatest gift we have has been given in the ways in which the American experiment continues to prosper despite our terrible misgivings. We are better off because of these men, and we are forever in their debt. For more information,
visit www.roblee4.com/presidents.